You know what nobody's talking about right now? The fact that 67% of American workers are now living paycheck to paycheck in 2025. That's up from 63% just last year. But here's the thing that really keeps me up at night. Even people making over $500,000 a year, yes, $500,000 annually, are saying they can barely make ends meet. If that doesn't scream collapse, I don't know what does. Listen, I spent the last 2 weeks digging through economic reports, talking to real families, and analyzing data from major financial institutions. And trust me, what I discovered is way worse than what you're seeing on the news. This isn't about politics. This isn't about fear-mongering. This is about cold, hard facts that are affecting your life right now, whether you realize it or not. Before we dive in, let me be clear about something. I'm not some conspiracy theorist predicting the end of the world. I'm looking at data from Goldman Sachs, Deloitte, PNC Bank, and the Federal Reserve. These aren't random blogs. These are the institutions that literally track our economy's pulse. And guess what? That pulse is getting weaker. Let's talk about what collapse actually means, because I think most people imagine something dramatic, like a stock market crash or riots in the streets. But here's what economists aren't telling you. Collapse doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow burn. And right now, we're watching it happen in real time. Picture this. Sarah, a 34-year-old nurse in Ohio, makes $65,000 a year. Sounds decent, right? But after taxes, she's bringing home about $4,200 monthly. Her rent? $1,500 for a basic two-bedroom apartment. Groceries? $400 a month, and that's with her cutting back to cheaper brands. Student loans? Another $500. Health insurance that her job doesn't fully cover? $300. Childcare for her 2-year-old? A shocking $800. Car payment? $500. Do the math with me here. That leaves her with exactly $300 for gas, household essentials, clothes, emergencies, everything else. Last month, her dog needed a $700 emergency vet visit. You know what she did? Put it on a credit card. And now she's stuck in that cycle, paying minimum payments with interest rates at historic highs. But here's the kicker that blew my mind. Sarah is actually doing better than millions of Americans, because at least she has a job. At least she has income. Now let me hit you with some statistics that honestly made me do a double take when I first saw them. According to a recent Bankrate survey, 77% of Americans don't feel financially secure. Think about that. 3 out of every 4 people in the richest country in the world are worried about money. But wait, it gets worse. Housing now consumes 51% of the median household income. In the year 2000, it was only 33%. That means housing costs have basically doubled as a percentage of what people earn. And I'm not just talking about expensive cities like New York or San Francisco. I'm talking about Cleveland, St. Louis, places that used to be affordable. Median home prices in these cities are now hovering around $300,000, requiring an income of at least $75,000 to $100,000 just to avoid being house poor. Here's something that absolutely shocked me. A recent study by Deloitte predicts that the U.S. economy could enter a recession in Q4 of 2026. And this isn't just any recession. Economists are warning about stagflation. You know what that is? It's when you have high inflation and a stagnant economy at the same time. The last time America dealt with stagflation was in the 1970s. And trust me, you don't want to go through that again. But here's what really gets me. The media isn't covering this properly. Politicians aren't talking about it honestly. And everyday people, they're suffering in silence because they think it's just them. They think they're the only ones struggling to pay bills. They think they're failing somehow. Let me tell you about a conversation I had last week with a financial advisor. She told me something that gave me chills. She said, I have clients making $150,000 a year who are one emergency away from financial disaster. One emergency away. That's not prosperity. That's fragility disguised as success. And it's not just about money. The Goldman Sachs report that came out in October 2025 predicts that by 2033, just 8 years from now, 55% of workers will be living paycheck to paycheck. By 2043, that number jumps to 65%. Let that sink in. 2/3 of American workers not having any financial breathing room. That's not a future we should accept. Now, you're probably wondering, how did we get here? Well, grab a coffee because this is where things get interesting. First, inflation. Consumer prices have risen 24.6% between August 2020 and August 2025. But here's the part nobody mentions. Wages haven't kept up. According to the Economic Policy Institute, productivity has grown more than 3 times faster than pay since 1979. Translation: companies are making more money, but workers aren't seeing it in their paychecks. Second, let's talk about debt. As of June 2024, 50% of all credit card holders are carrying debt. And with interest rates at their highest levels in decades, that debt is growing faster than people can pay it off. I recently spoke with a debt counselor who told me her clients are now using credit cards just to pay for basic necessities like groceries and electricity. That's not normal. That's a crisis. Third, and this is huge, healthcare costs. Did you know that about 41% of American adults have some form of healthcare-related debt? We're talking about roughly $220 billion in medical debt across 20 million people. One medical emergency can wipe out years of savings. I've seen it happen to families I know personally. Fourth, housing. This deserves its own section because it's probably the biggest wealth killer right now. Mortgage rates have skyrocketed. Rent has become unaffordable in most major cities. And the supply of affordable housing? It hasn't kept up with demand since before the 2008 financial crisis. Let's talk about something that hurts to admit. The middle class, the backbone of the American economy, is disappearing. In the late 1970s, you could work a single job as a nurse or a factory worker and support a family of 4. You could buy a house, take a vacation once a year, save for retirement, and send your kids to college without drowning in debt. That was normal. Today, the Census Bureau reports that median household income is about $74,500, but the baseline cost of living a middle-class life, mortgage, car, childcare, healthcare, easily reaches $120,000 to $140,000 a year in many metro areas. You see the gap? Families are plugging that gap with credit cards, side hustles, and stress. Lots and lots of stress. Credit card delinquencies are at a 13-year high. That's not a coincidence. That's desperation showing up in the data. Now here's something that really bothers me. This crisis is hitting younger generations the hardest. According to recent surveys, 68.5% of Gen Z and 56.5% of millennials are living paycheck to paycheck. These are the generations that were told, go to college, get a degree, work hard, and you'll be successful. But what happened? They graduated with an average of $30,000 to $40,000 in student loan debt. They entered a job market where entry-level positions now require 5 years of experience. They're facing housing prices that have tripled since their parents were their age. And retirement? Forget about it. Many of them don't even think they'll be able to retire. A recent Goldman Sachs report highlighted something heartbreaking. Young adults today are delaying major life milestones. They're pushing back marriage. They're waiting to have kids. They're giving up on homeownership. Not because they don't want these things, but because they literally can't afford them. But here's what really broke my heart when I was doing this research. It's not just about economics. This financial stress is destroying people's health, relationships, and mental well-being. Studies show that people who entered the job market during the 1981-1982 recession experienced lower wages for decades. But it didn't stop there. They had lower marriage rates, higher divorce rates, more health problems, higher disability rates, and even shorter lifespans. One recession didn't just hurt them financially. It affected their entire lives. Now imagine that happening to 67% of American workers. Imagine an entire generation scarred by financial instability. That's what we're looking at right now. Here's the part that frustrates me the most. The conversations we're having about this crisis are all wrong. Politicians blame the other party. Economists use complicated jargon. Financial advisors tell people to just budget better. But nobody's addressing the fundamental problem. The system isn't working for regular people anymore. UCLA economists recently issued a recession watch warning for 2025. They're not just worried about a normal recession, they're worried about stagflation, where we have high inflation and economic contraction at the same time. And if that happens, the Federal Reserve will be stuck between raising interest rates to fight inflation, which kills jobs, or lowering rates to help the economy, which makes inflation worse. It's a no-win situation. And here's the scary part. Unlike previous recessions that were caused by specific events like a housing bubble or a financial crash, this one is being driven by policy decisions, tariffs, immigration restrictions, government spending. These are choices, not accidents. Let me bring this back to something tangible. Let's talk about what this collapse looks like in everyday life. Grocery prices are up nearly 25% since 2020. Eggs jumped over 10% earlier this year. Beef prices rose over 2%. Childcare now costs a median of $1,100 per month for 20 or more hours per week. Insurance premiums for health, car, and home are all hitting record highs. I talked to a teacher in Texas last month. She makes $48,000 a year. After taxes and insurance, she brings home about $3,200 monthly. Her rent is $1,400. Student loans, $350. Car payment and insurance, $450. Phone, internet, utilities, $250. Groceries, $400. That leaves her with $350 for gas, clothes, any kind of savings, entertainment, everything else. And she's an educated professional with a full-time job. She told me something that stuck with me. I did everything right. I went to college, I got a good job, I work hard, and I'm still struggling. What am I supposed to tell my students? So when does this slow collapse become obvious to everyone? Well, according to the data, we're already there. We just haven't admitted it yet. The warning signs are everywhere. Restaurants are seeing fewer customers. Retail stores are reporting lower sales. People are trading down, buying cheaper brands, skipping purchases, making do with what they have. Car loan delinquencies are rising. Bankruptcies are trending up. But here's the thing about a slow collapse. It doesn't feel like a collapse while it's happening. It feels like being tired. It feels like stress. It feels like wondering why everything is so hard when you're doing everything right. And that's exactly where most Americans are right now. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is depressing. What am I supposed to do about it? And you're right to ask that question, because while I can't fix the economy, I can tell you what smart people are doing right now to protect themselves. First, they're cutting unnecessary expenses. And I mean, really auditing where money goes. Those subscriptions you forgot about, cancel them. That $6 coffee every morning, start making it at home. I know it sounds small, but that's $180 a month right there. Second, they're building emergency funds. Even if it's just $10 or $20 per paycheck, something is better than nothing. Financial experts say you should have 3 to 6 months of expenses saved. But honestly, in this economy, start with $1,000. That's enough to cover most emergencies without going into debt. Third, they're paying down high-interest debt as fast as possible. Credit card interest rates are insane right now. If you're carrying a balance, that needs to be priority number one. Use the snowball method. Pay off the smallest debt first, then roll that payment into the next smallest debt. It builds momentum. Fourth, and this is controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway, they're looking for additional income streams. Side hustles aren't glamorous, but they're necessary for many people right now. Freelancing, gig work, whatever you can do to bring in extra money. But here's the uncomfortable truth that I need to share with you. Individual solutions aren't enough to fix a systemic problem. You can budget perfectly, work 2 jobs, skip vacations, and still struggle if the cost of living keeps rising faster than wages. You can do everything right and still end up in financial trouble because of one medical emergency or one job loss. This isn't a personal failure. This is a structural failure. And until we start having honest conversations about wages, healthcare costs, housing affordability, student debt, and income inequality, the collapse will continue. It'll just happen slowly enough that we normalize it. We'll get used to the idea that a college degree means decades of debt. We'll accept that home ownership is out of reach for most young people. We'll shrug when we hear that people are working into their 70s because they can't afford to retire. But should we? Should we accept this as the new normal? Let me share something that an economist told me that honestly gave me chills. He said, We're not talking about if there will be a recession. We're talking about how bad it will be and how long it will last. A recent bank rate survey shows that economists see a 39% chance of recession by September 2026. Those aren't great odds, folks. And if that recession hits during a time when most families have no savings, high debt, and unstable employment, it's going to be devastating. The Federal Reserve is trying to thread the needle. They need to keep interest rates high enough to control inflation, but low enough to avoid crashing the economy. But with all the other pressures, tariffs, immigration policies, government spending, it's like trying to pilot a plane while someone else is messing with the controls. So why isn't this bigger news? Why aren't we talking about this collapse constantly? Well, there are a few reasons. First, it's uncomfortable. Nobody wants to admit that the American dream might be dying. It goes against everything we've been told about working hard and getting ahead. Second, it's complex. It's easier to talk about stock market numbers or unemployment rates than to explain how structural economic forces are squeezing the middle class. Third, and this is the cynical take, but I think it's true, people with power benefit from the status quo. If workers are barely scraping by, they're not going to rock the boat. They're not going to demand change. They're too busy trying to survive. And that's exactly what's happening right now. People are so stressed about paying their bills that they don't have the time or energy to organize, to protest, to demand systemic change. It's exhausting by design. Let me zoom out for a second and talk about what this means for America as a whole. When most people are struggling financially, consumer spending drops, and consumer spending makes up about 70% of our economy. So when people can't afford to buy things beyond necessities, businesses suffer. When businesses suffer, they cut jobs. When they cut jobs, unemployment rises. When unemployment rises, even fewer people have money to spend. It's a vicious cycle, and we're seeing the early stages of it right now. Retail sales are slowing. Business investment is cautious. The job market is cooling. By September 2026, economists predict unemployment will hit 4.6%, with job growth averaging just 49,000 jobs per month. That's less than half the current pace. This isn't prosperity. This is stagnation with a smile. Now, I'm a bit of a history nerd, so let me share something interesting. Every major economic crisis in American history happened after a period of rising inequality and financial speculation. The Great Depression came after the Roaring Twenties, when wealth became concentrated at the top while regular people took on massive debt. The 2008 financial crisis? Same story. Housing prices soared, Wall Street made billions, and everyday people were left holding the bag. And now, we're seeing record corporate profits while workers struggle to afford basics. We're seeing billionaires launch themselves into space while teachers work second jobs. We're seeing Wall Street celebrate while Main Street suffers. History doesn't repeat, but it sure does rhyme. So, let me ask you some hard questions. And I want you to really think about your answers. Do you feel more financially secure today than you did 5 years ago? Could you handle a $500 emergency without going into debt? Are you confident you'll be able to retire comfortably? Do you think your kids will have a better life than you? If you answered no to any of these questions, you're not alone. Millions of Americans are in the same boat. And that should terrify us. Because a society where most people are financially insecure is an unstable society. It's a society where people are desperate, stressed, and willing to support extreme solutions because the moderate ones have failed them. Look, I didn't make this video to depress you. I made it because I think awareness is the first step toward change. We can't fix problems we pretend don't exist. And right now, too many people are pretending that everything is fine. They're comparing their struggles to their neighbors and thinking, well, everyone's struggling, so I guess this is just how it is now. But it doesn't have to be this way. We live in the richest country in the history of the world. We have the resources, the technology, the wealth to ensure that people who work full-time can afford a decent life. We choose not to do that. And I think it's time we start asking why. The collapse of life in America isn't some future dystopia. It's happening right now, slowly, quietly, in ways that feel normal until you zoom out and look at the bigger picture. 67% of workers living paycheck to paycheck. 77% of Americans feeling financially insecure. Housing eating up over half of people's incomes. Healthcare costs driving people into bankruptcy. Student debt crushing an entire generation. Retirement savings virtually non-existent for millions. These aren't isolated problems. They're symptoms of a system that's broken. And until we face that reality, until we have honest conversations about what's happening and what needs to change, the collapse will continue. Maybe you're watching this and thinking I'm being dramatic. Maybe you're thinking things will get better on their own. I hope you're right. I really do. But the data says otherwise. So here's what I want you to do. Don't just watch this video and move on with your day. First, take stock of your own financial situation. Be honest with yourself about where you stand. Second, have real conversations with family and friends. You'll probably discover they're struggling too. There's power in shared awareness. Third, make the changes you can control. Cut expenses, build savings, pay down debt, find additional income if possible. But fourth, and this is crucial, don't blame yourself for structural problems. You're not failing. The system is failing you. And fifth, start asking questions. Why is housing so expensive? Why hasn't the minimum wage kept up with inflation? Why do we accept that medical bills can bankrupt families? Why is college so expensive? Why are corporate profits at record highs while workers struggle? Ask those questions loudly. Ask them often. Ask them until someone in power has to answer. If this video opened your eyes to what's really happening, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone who needs to see it. Leave a comment telling me your story, because I know I'm not the only one seeing this collapse happening. And remember, awareness is uncomfortable, but it's also necessary. The collapse of life in America has already begun. The question is, what are we going to do about it? I'll see you in the next one. Stay aware, stay prepared, and most importantly, stay connected to each other. We're going to need community.